This week on The Inside Story, on the first anniversary of the deadly Hamas terror attack on Israel, the conflict widens and conditions in Gaza worsen. Plus, a look at Muslim Americans and the upcoming U.S. presidential election. Now, on The Inside Story, Israel-Gaza, a year at war.
Hello and welcome to The Inside Story. I'm VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb in Washington. This week marks 1 year since the deadly October 7th Hamas attack into Israel, one that left more than 1,200 people dead and more than 200 held in captivity. According to the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry, the war that followed has killed more than 40,000 in Gaza. In Israel, nearly everyone has been affected. Many have lost loved ones. Others have had their homes and communities destroyed. VOA visited some of the hardest hit sites. We start with the first of several reports from VOA's Linda Gradstein.
For Talma Atzili, it's still October 7th, 2023. Her son Aviv was killed as he fought hundreds of Hamas gunmen who stormed their kibbutz near Oz, less than a kilometer from the Gaza border. Aviv's remains are still being held hostage in Gaza, so a temporary grave has been set up for him at the kibbutz.
I can't even think of what will be here, both in terms of security and in terms of the emotional strength required to return to a place that has absorbed so much loss. I very much enjoyed walking barefoot, both inside the kibbutz and in the fields. And now I have this sort of feeling that the land here is soaked in blood, and how can I continue to walk barefoot?
1/4 of Nir Oz's residents were killed or taken hostage, and more than half the homes destroyed. In nearby kibbutz Be'eri, more than 100 residents were killed, among them Hagi Avni, a father of 5 and member of the Be'eri security squad. His 9-year-old daughter, Eliel, writes his name on the wall of her former room.
I miss my daddy. I wanted to say goodbye to my house before they destroy it and rebuild it.
But many residents of Be'eri and other Gaza border communities doubt that they will move back in.
The question is how to live here with some kind of arrangement, like with Egypt and Jordan. It's impossible to continue living on the sword all the time. I don't accept that there will be endless war next to me.
A year on, hostage families still stage mass protest rallies demanding that the Israeli government bring back some 100 remaining hostages. Avichai Brodech from Kibbutz Kfar Aza began the protest movement days after his wife and 3 young children were taken hostage on October 7th. His family was released in the November hostage deal. But speaking at the ruins of his kibbutz, Brodech says Israeli society still feels the trauma.
As a nation, we have to remember this as part of the Jewish history to remember. But personally, if you ask me, I'd like to live my life, just look forward, live in peace. After we suffered so much, I think we have a good opportunity to do it now. Both sides suffered so much.
But a year later, a Gaza ceasefire and hostage release seem far away. For those in Israel missing loved ones and their lost communities, October 7th, 2023 is never ending. Linda Gradstein, VOA News in the Gaza border communities.
In Gaza, the search for safety and basic needs is a daily routine. The United Nations says the conflict has displaced nearly 2 million people. That's 86% of Gaza's pre-war population. Nadal Manduna, Amjad Tantesh, and Inas Tantesh went to southern Gaza for VOA to see the living conditions at one of these camps and speak with some of the refugees. Our reporter Dorian Jones tells us what they found.
The Beit Lahia camp in southern Gaza is home to 200 families. One of them is the Salha family, who moved from northern Gaza after an Israeli strike destroyed their home. A tent made of plastic sheets is now home to Wada Al-Moslami and her husband Monder, and their 5 sons and 2 daughters. Each day is a struggle.
Everything is difficult in our life because there is no water, electricity, or any other necessities. The first thing we do every day is look for drinkable water. We fill plastic containers from the water stations, and then we wash the children's faces, comb their hair. Each one of us has our own daily tasks.
Today, it's 13-year-old Bana Salha's job to collect water from the water station. Bana, who, with the rest of the family, has moved 4 times since their home was destroyed, says she longs for her life to return to normal.
We hope to rebuild our house because it was destroyed. We want to rebuild our house and go back to the north. We want to see our friends, our schoolmates, and our teachers, and go back to our schools.
Bana's father, Monde, is a construction worker. This is the 4th time he's had to build tents for his family out of plastic sheets as they constantly move to escape the fighting across Gaza. With temperatures set to dip as low as 8 degrees Celsius, Monde says he's doing his best to repair and prepare their latest tent for the onset of winter, as he has no money for a stronger shelter because he cannot find work.
Finding work depends on your relationship with the community. We are strangers here, even though we are Gazans, because we are going from place to place, region to region. With this war, there is no work.
Along with other women in the camp, Monde's wife, Wada, spends much of her day preparing food and baking bread in a clay oven. She sells some of the bread, bringing in a small income. At the end of Wada's day, she takes a welcome break with other women, but she says their conversations are dominated by the war and the approaching cold, wet winter.
The shelling is everywhere in any area. It doesn't matter if there are people or not. In the markets, in schools, the shelling is everywhere. We are also afraid of the rain. We are not prepared for winter.
Multiple attempts at peace negotiations have failed. Israel says the war will only end with the destruction of Hamas and the return of all remaining Israeli hostages taken by Hamas during the attack it led on Israel on October the 7th, 1 year ago. Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in Deir al-Balah is one of the few remaining medical facilities serving about half of the Gaza Strip's nearly 2 million people. For Dr. Ibrahim Abu Sakur, a refugee from the north of Gaza, every day brings more casualties from the fighting between Israel and Hamas.
It's wartime. The wounded are expected to come at any moment. Anything is expected. Problems and challenges, especially in the operating room. We are always thinking of how we can manage the situation with the larger number of injuries that could come every single hour. How and where to find a place for them and to treat them.
Along with working to find beds for newly arrived patients, Abu Sakur is the hospital's head of general surgery. He starts his day visiting patients, among them Imam al-Rai. Her mother, Rida al-Rai, says her daughter lost her leg in an Israeli missile attack on their home and may need another surgery to save her other leg. Rida says a lack of medicine compounds her daughter's agony.
Sometimes her screams fill the place. She almost dies from the pain. This happens to everyone else as well. Tonight my daughter didn't sleep. She needs painkillers, medicine, and treatment. There is not enough. Thank God, though, for this hospital, as it provides more services than it can handle.
Dr. Abu Sakur spends much of his day in surgery, but he says he's always thinking about how to deal with shortages and searching for alternatives, at a time when demands on the hospital are growing and resources are dwindling.
Lack of medical equipment is overwhelming the capacity of the hospital. Most surgical tools are almost non-existent. Asking for anything, the answer is always, we don't have it, there's none left. The condition in the hospital is indescribable, starting from the lack of medical supplies and surgical tools to the clinical capacity.
After a day of performing surgeries, largely on the war wounded, Dr. Abu Sakur makes another round. Thousands come each month, and Dr. Abu Sakur worries about how long he and the other staff can keep going.
I don't know how the war started and how it will end, but the injuries are beyond our capacity. This is beyond the power of any human being, doctor, hospital, or anyone. I don't know how we endured the pain and fatigue, but we are still holding on. I pray that this war will end soon.
With diplomatic efforts failing and the war escalating, there's little hope that his prayers will be answered or that relief will come for these patients anytime soon. With Enes Tantash, Nadal Hamdouna and Amjad Tantash in Gaza, Dorian Jones, VOA News.
Thousands of Israelis were injured in this past year of war, most of them soldiers. VOA met an Israeli reservist whose company trains military units on how to respond to terror attacks. As Linda Gradstein reports, Israel is one of the world's leaders in rehabilitation, but the ongoing war in Gaza has strained the country's resources.
Yonti Bahat's Extreme Simulations company trains Israeli security forces to respond to military and terrorist attacks using mannequins and rubber body parts. But no simulation could have prepared Bahat, a 48-year-old Israeli reservist paratrooper, for being critically wounded in Gaza in the war against Hamas. He was hospitalized for 6 months after his shoulder and lower leg were shattered. Now he has begun the long process of physical and psychological rehabilitation at Beit HaLochem, the soldier's house.
A very important part of the rehabilitation is the hydrotherapy. There are many things that water help to start doing or to do better and so on. And it's also good for the mind.
The Israeli army says that more than 10,700 soldiers have been wounded since the war with Hamas in Gaza began almost a year ago. 1/3 of those are suffering from trauma, while more than 1/3 have damage to their limbs, including nearly 70 amputees. The head of the Tzahal Disabled Veterans Organization, Idan Kleiman, was himself paralyzed from the chest down when he was shot fighting in Gaza in 1992. He says that improved medical services on the battlefield, like combat paramedics performing emergency surgeries under fire, have saved many lives compared to previous wars. But many soldiers who survived suffered very serious injuries. Kleiman says that budgets for expanded rehabilitation facilities have increased by 30%.
We saw people lose two hands and one leg, 2 legs and 1 hand, and still keep living and coming to the hospital and surviving these injuries. The people who were paralyzed and the blind and the people that had injuries and very, very hard had injuries. So the doctors challenging, our facilities and all our staff challenging people that so badly wounded that we didn't even recognize before.
Israel is in the forefront internationally at treating wounded soldiers using high tech to make prostheses for amputees and for innovative rehabilitation techniques using virtual reality. Intensive rehabilitation therapy, both physical and psychological, is essential for wounded combat engineer Erez Amsalem, who almost lost his leg in a suicide bomb attack in Gaza. He says that he and thousands of other disabled soldiers will be part of a new reality in Israel.
To see in the street young people without arms or legs, young people with canes or wheelchairs, it's sad that this will appear normal. I think this is one of the only things that the entire Israeli society can agree about. There are no disputes about the issue of disabled veterans.
The past year of war in Gaza has led to a sharp increase in the number of young Israeli soldiers wounded, both physically and emotionally. The challenge for the country, with its population of just under 10 million, will be how to first rehabilitate them and then integrate them into Israeli society. Linda Gradstein, VOA News, Jerusalem.
The U.S. has tens of thousands of forces in the Middle East meant to deter malign actors like Iran from expanding the war in Gaza into an all-out regional war. But with Iran striking twice into Israel this year and Israeli forces now conducting operations in southern Lebanon, reporters asked Singh if the Pentagon still believes the war is contained.
We've been pretty clear that Israel has an absolute right to, in terms of defending itself, going after those terrorists that attacked Israel and killed innocent civilians, over a year ago now. how success is defined, that's something for Israel to really define. And that's not something that the United States can define. But they have every right to continue to go after Hamas, that we know continues to operate in Gaza, continues to hold hostages that haven't been able to come home for, more than a year now, and continues to put innocent Palestinians in harm's way by, embedding in civilian infrastructure. Israel also must make sure that they're protecting civilians as they prosecute their campaign against Hamas.
Hamas in Gaza and the far better equipped regional power Hezbollah in Lebanon operate as Iranian proxies. Israeli forces killed top leaders of both groups following the Hamas terror attacks on Israel last October. Despite the losses, however, analysts say Iran remains a formidable power in the region. We go back to Linda Gradstein in Jerusalem.
Except for one night in April when Iran launched over 300 missiles and drones against Israel, Iran has avoided direct conflict with Israel during the past year. But now analysts expect an Iranian response to the Israeli assassination of Hezbollah's Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Iran's most powerful regional proxy.
I absolutely think that they will respond. They will use the forces that they have built, some of them jointly, the Al-Quds Iranian Revolutionary Guard Force and the Hezbollah force. I think that they will respond in the world. I think that they will respond against an Israeli Jewish target like they did against Argentinian Jewish targets in 1992-3-4.
With Iran's support, Hamas continues to fight Israel in Gaza, its military force weakened but not destroyed. Even after the assassination of Nasrallah and other military commanders, Iran's proxy Hezbollah in Lebanon continues to fire missiles at Israel, with over 8,000 launched since October 7th, according to Israeli officials. Another Iranian proxy, the Houthis in Yemen, have also launched ballistic missiles at the Tel Aviv area, 2 of which were shot down last week. The past year of multi-front attacks against Israel is the culmination of a decades-long Iranian strategy to gain control of the Middle East, according to Israeli analysts.
When you see the Iranian force building, the military, the covert operations, the proxies, Hamas, Houthis, the Shia militia in Iraq and Syria, the Hezbollah in Lebanon, all of those goes into the point which allows Iran to get control and to be the superpower of the Middle East.
Analysts also say that the Israeli military cannot match the strategic strength of Iran and its proxies in a long-term conflict.
We are a smaller country with limited resources. We cannot fight forever. Iran is 10 times bigger in its population. It's 80 times bigger than in its territory. So they can wage a fight against Israel because they deploy Arabs who do the fighting for them while bleeding us and bleeding our economy.
Israelis say their armed forces may be stretched to the limit by a year of continuous fighting on multiple fronts. If Iran launches a full-scale assault, Israel may need the support of the United States, which is already sending a second aircraft carrier and additional troops to the region. Linda Gradstein, VOA News, Jerusalem.
Muslims in the United States account for less than 2% of the entire population. But as VOA's Kane Faribaugh reports, Muslim American influence in U.S. elections is on the rise, driven largely by concerns over the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas.
In the Chicago, Illinois suburb of Bridgeview, also known as Little Palestine, workers at the Kawa serve a seemingly endless supply of coffee products to the Palestinian Americans rotating through the shop.
Anywhere you go in this area, you'll see people who are visibly Muslim.
Deanna Othman teaches at the local Islamic school and frequents the Kawa. The most important issue to Othman this election year is ending the war between Israel and U.S. designated terrorist group Hamas.
To win my vote, I would have to see a commitment to ending the genocide immediately.
Many in Little Palestine share Othman's concerns. Cook County, Illinois, encompassing Chicago and Bridgeview, has the largest Palestinian community in the country. Illinois is home to about 475,000 Muslim Americans, about 3.7% of the total population.
They do make up a substantial minority in Illinois, and they tend to vote Democrat.
Tabitha Bonilla is a professor of social policy at Northwestern University.
So in Illinois, it's unlikely that they would swing an election, but in a state like Michigan, they're estimated to be about 200,000 Muslim American voters. And just for reference, the gap between Republicans and Democrats in the last presidential election was 154,000 people. So if all 200,000 Muslim American voters decide either not to vote or to not vote Democrat, that could really make a difference in a swing state like Michigan.
These are folks in Michigan that know firsthand the impact of American-funded bombs.
Layla Elabed is a community political organizer in Michigan and sister of the state's Palestinian American Congresswoman, Rashida Tlaib.
We want to shift course on the current policy and adopt a policy that will save Palestinian lives.
The Muslim community, not just in Michigan, but in nearly every state, is more active, more involved than ever before.
Keith Ellison is Minnesota's current Attorney General and was one of the first Muslim American members of the U.S. Congress.
The Muslim community has stronger political muscles than ever before and is making itself heard.
Dina Othman says she wishes she had other options on the ballot.
I feel like the majority of people in this area do not want to vote Democrat or Republican.
The Council on American Islamic Relations, or CAIR, estimates more than 2.2 million Muslim Americans are registered to vote in the United States this election year. It says that represents an increase of more than 1 million since the midterm election 2 years ago. Kane Fairbaugh, VOA News, Bridgeview, Illinois.
The Hamas terror attack last October and the ongoing war that followed is the deadliest conflict in recent history for journalists and members of the media. So far, at least 116 journalists have died, nearly all of them Palestinian. VOA spoke with reporters who cover the conflict, as well as media analysts, about the essential mission of journalists working freely on the ground. Our press freedom reporters Christina Casido Smith and Liam Scott have the story. Smith narrates.
More journalists were killed in the first 10 weeks of the war than have ever been killed in a single country over the course of an entire year.
According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, the death toll as of October 9 is 123 Palestinians, 2 Israelis and 3 Lebanese journalists.
There is also are very great challenges in terms of access to the story for journalists. And the story is, in my experience, the most polarizing story we've ever had to deal with in my long career as a journalist.
Tarek Hajjaj is a Gaza correspondent for Mondoweiss, an online publication covering the Palestinian territories, Israel, and U.S. policy. He has lived his entire life in Gaza City.
And every time I was walking under the Israeli drones and warplanes, I was feeling that every second they may bomb me, specifically me, because I know they target journalists and I know they don't want anything from Gaza to get out to the people.
Founded as a progressive news site, Mondoweiss has faced criticism for what some say are anti-Israeli views. The Israeli government has denied on multiple occasions that it targets journalists, but CPJ and others say the Israel Defense Forces should be accountable for the high media death toll. Nearly all those who died are Palestinian.
They're also the only people able to report from Gaza because no foreign journalists have been allowed in. So they bear the full weight of responsibility of reporting on the impact of the war on Gaza.
Injury and death are not the only risks journalists face.
Some of the dangers are not just physical dangers, but there's cyber stalking and harassment and intimidation of journalists.
The United Nations had condemned the attacks on journalists, indicating that there were disturbing reports of attacks against media workers despite being clearly identified. In response to a UN report, the IDF said it does not deliberately shoot at civilians, including journalists. Hajjaj remembers every story he has covered since October 7. Some, he says, were devastating to write, but he knows it's his job to keep reporting on what is happening. With Liam Scott, Christina Caicedo Smith, VOA News.
That's all for now. Thanks for watching. For the latest news, you can log on to voanews.com. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at VOA News. To get more VOA content, follow me on X at CarlaBabVOA. Catch up on past episodes at our free streaming service VOA Plus. I'm Carla Babb. We will see you next week for The Inside Story.